This video is brought to you by the lovely guys over at RoboToys. For all your Hasbro, Takara, third-party and knockoff desires, RoboToys has you covered. For 10% off, use the code DrLock 10% off at the checkout. Now on to today's diagnosis.
Read the disclaimer! Wait, who the f***'s knocking at this hour?
Earthrise, as far as lines go, isn't the worst produced by Hasbro, but it's definitely not putting their best foot forward. Often the designers will use the G1 accuracy element as an excuse for lazy engineering, which I have dubbed Earthrise laziness in previous videos. Now I have received a lot of pushback for these opinions, but... what the f***? I thought someone was knocking at the door. Jesus. What the hell? I'm in the middle of filming, goddammit. Anyway, I've received a lot of pushback for these opinions, but when you compare Earthrise to Siege, or even the recent Netflix Siege repaints, it just doesn't stack up. So today, I thought it would be a good idea—
Yo, Doc, I found this ugly thing rolling around. Oi, shut the f*** up, you bootlegged Hatsune
Wait,
Miku.
where did you find that thing?
Oh, it was banging on the door outside. I told you to shut it.
Vaughn. That's a mascot character.
Oh no!
What that means!
Nobody expects the Firebyte Inquisition!
Just roll the credits.
So, what's all this about on Hoist?
Look, I'm sorry, but aside from Sound Barrier, he's easily the worst figure of the entire Earthrise line so far.
Wait, really? I mean, by technicality, I guess he's the worst, but really, he's worse than Starscream?
At least Starscream's not a hollow mess. This feels like a Power of the Primes figure.
I fail to see how that is a bad thing.
We're not gonna get anywhere without going over specifics, are we?
Are you going to keep holding Maya hostage? Cause I kinda need her for videos.
Well, in that case, I suppose I'm forced to turn this into a crossover episode. Begrudgingly. Greetings, Cybertronians. I'm DrLockdown.
And salutations, denizens of the internet. I'm Firebyte27.
And today's diagnosis
Analysis.
Shut up, pertains to WFC-E5 Earthrise Deluxe Classed Hoist. So much like every figure in this line, in vehicle mode, Hoist transforms into a far from moist recreation of his G1 vehicle form, teetering on the line of a lawsuit but just getting away with it, and in terms of execution, it's a total show.
Okay, you're being a bit harsh here. Well, yeah, this isn't perfect, and I'm admittedly indifferent to alt modes usually. I do like it a lot. It's definitely got a lot more angles than the majority of alt modes in the Earthrise and Siege line. And right off the bat, you can see just how much mechanical detail they packed into this alt mode and its design. The silver on the grille and the large Autobot symbol on the hood really do a great job of drawing your attention towards them. It is a very nice change of pace considering that we're coming here from the Studio series, which barely, if ever, shows off the bot or con symbols of their characters. You'll also notice that they have molded in a winch, and it contrasts great against the blue windscreen and the blue headlights. Not to mention, I appreciate the fact that the designers managed to minimize the number of seam lines on this vehicle mode. It helps to make the alt mode one of Earthrise's most cohesive vehicles, though that's kind of a low bar to meet.
I suppose there are things I do like about it. Whilst the bed section is a little messy, it does serve a rather nifty purpose. They've converted the traditional tow section into a ramp for compatibility.
It's called the airlock system.
That's stupid, and I'll pretend you never said that. Now, much like Prime, this feature received a lot of pushback, not because it's a clunky gimmick, which I guess it kinda is anyway, but rather because it's not accurate to the G1 toy, which you do you, I guess. That said, also like Prime, I find this feature quite fun. As far as the transformation and robot mode are concerned, this element doesn't cause many issues, because there are other things that do that.
I too enjoy this feature, though the enjoyment of its presence is far greater than my actual use of the feature. Though, in terms of the line-wide gimmick, I'm actually pretty happy that Hoist got involved. They even included a tiny wheel on the back, which is a nice touch. And that's not to say that there aren't any G1 throwbacks in this vehicle mode. Oh no! Folding the ramp down provides access to the light bar that was present on the G1 toy, as well as the wings that fold out despite not providing any airlift. Seriously though, you G1ers complain about the weirdest shit some days, not the least of which being Slex exhaust like a Marlboro decal.
But that's not G1 accuracy, that's Diaclone accuracy.
Wait, there's a difference?
I also like the shift to tamper-graft battle damage, which appears on the front of the vehicle mode in the form of faux paint chipping. Fortunately, this vehicle mode doesn't have any actual paint chipping though. F*** you, Starscream. And the way this is done works wonders for the design.
The paint and tampografts on the side are also done extremely well, with not just amazing hazard lines on the side, but also taillights painted in orange on the back. The reasons why they used orange paint here completely elude me, especially because it makes it hard to separate the rear lights from the rest of the orange back panel. However, the realism provided by the caution stripes is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, and I suppose they at least used that to make an attempt to cover up the mismatched plastic.
Oh yeah, that. I don't think it's that bad.
Usually I don't either, but in this instance it looks incredibly off. The front section is cast in clear blue plastic, which is fine and all, but it's not the paint that's covering it that seems to be the issue. They've used this awful plastic on the back section, which looks like a sunburnt eraser more than it looks like proper plastic. It almost looks knockoff-ish, and considering what Hasbro is able to do with their paint applications these days, this feels like a massive oversight. It's like they put all the budget into the hazard lines and then just kinda gave up on the plastic. Also, the underside is a mess. Literally only the top section of this vehicle mode looks any good. Look at this god-awful kibble. You've got both the waist and the fists on show. I get that no one's going to display their figures from the underside, but it should at least look cohesive from straight on.
I don't think it's actually that bad. Mostly because I think the placement of the arms was intentional in order to mirror forward suspension on the wheels.
Yeah, suspenders of disbelief that came out of a factory faulty. I mean, just look at the front section. Look at all the hollow space they could have engineered this kibble into. Much like other toys before him, he's using the G1 aesthetic as an excuse to not try anything unique and interesting. Also, whilst with Optimus the mismatched wheels were a slight annoyance, here it's gone way too far. There's virtually no cohesion between the two, and considering the way he's designed, they could have easily molded in another hubcap instead of whatever this is.
Actually, that's a 5mm weapon port.
Ah yes, the weapon that looks like a butt plug. Like, I'm not one for extreme G1 accuracy, but I'm aware of the search engine Google, and I know through that this gun isn't accurate in the slightest. It kind of is in the sculpt work, but it's way too short and girthy, hence the phallic comparison. Also doesn't help that none of the ports look any good. Gee, I wonder if there was a giant space at the front of the car where they could have stored it. Oh wait! And finally, if the plastic mismatch wasn't enough, the windows also fail immensely. I guess I should be glad the clear plastic isn't as brittle as any of the other cases, but come on, does blue not exist in your paint vault?
They probably do have blue paint, they're just too cheap to use it. Speaking of cheap, can I have mine back now? Or am I gonna have to pay ransom for that?
Oh, right, forgot about that. Vaughn, do the teleporty thing.
Oh, right. I'm gonna get this f***ing gremlin outside
Oh my goodness! Well, now I have to talk about this bit. Up until this point, I hadn't had a single issue with the clear plastic. And in fact, when I initially bought this figure, it seemed fairly durable for clear plastic. That is until one night a few weeks ago when I absentmindedly placed my hand on top of the figure after throwing it under a blanket while I was looking for Cliff Jumper and snapping the wheel clean off. Now then, up until this point, I had enjoyed this figure tremendously, and to an extent I still do, but this one flaw has irreversibly tainted my opinion of it. I still like it, but it's not making it to my top 20 list at the end of the year. Honorable mention or not.
And here I thought this figure was actually built well. Turns out it's constructed about as well as it feels. I realize for display-oriented collectors this won't mean a damn, but this doesn't feel like a War for Cybertron figure at all. Figures in this trilogy feel immensely solid and chunky, despite having rather blocky parts with some hollowness in certain instances. Hell, some of the figures that actually have visible hollowness feel way better than those in the Prime Wars trilogy. Hoist, however, feels like a toy from said Prime Wars trilogy. Now that in itself isn't a bad thing, but the era in which a toy comes out is very important to giving it a fair score. I'm not going to complain that a G1 toy lacks articulation, because it's a G1 toy, but when you consider the high level of quality with figures that have come out this year and the last, this simply doesn't hold a candle. I've said this before and I'll say it again, Transformers are one of the most tactile focused action figures on the market. As such, they need to feel good as well as look good.
Oh well, I guess you're right. If a figure doesn't feel good to mess around with, then you don't really have an incentive to transform it. But he does have an impressive size, even when going back to earlier figures from the late 2000s and early 2010s.
Unfortunately, that's actually going to be a bit of an issue later on, but that doesn't really apply until we get to the robot mode. As such, let's just get on with the transformation. Earthrise Hoist doesn't have a bad transformation, but neither does he have a really good one. He's just kinda there. It's sort of like lukewarm porridge. There's no flavor to it, there's no interesting moments. It's functional, but ultimately kind of pointless. First thing you want to do is take the backpack here and untab it from the whole section there. Then you come under here and untab the arms and move them forward a little bit. These are pegged in on the sides and you just sort of unpeg them there. And the waist section is locked in, you just need to untab it from there. and it just, folds out like so. And whilst we're here, I suppose you can untab the legs like that and bring them down here. They're on a single hinge, but there is a double hinge there. You then take the front section and fold it up entirely, and that allows you to then bring these sections out like so. Make sure this double hinge is all the way out so that you have enough clearance to get the head out. Bring the front section back down and lock it into place under there. Then you've got that giant tab there and that giant slot there, and the two just kind of peg together. And then you bring this whole section up on the back there. Kind of locks into place. Bring the arm sections down and also down. Rotate them into place like so. And also rotate the fists around. I find a lot of people forget that. And last but not least, backpack time. You bring the wings out. Temporarily bring that down so that you can access the hat. Get out of there. Jeez, it's a bit difficult to get out. And then you can, of course, fold that back up. Clip it back into place, readjust the wings, and you're done. So yeah, lukewarm porridge in the physical embodiment of... Wait, why is the music speeding up?
Sorry, just used to speeding up the transformations with music.
Jesus, just let me finish it, I'm almost done. But yeah, lukewarm porridge, the transformation. Yes, it's functional. Yes, it works, but... there's not really much to it. Nothing really pops out at you and makes you remember it. It's just there, and I suppose if the robot mode is amazing, it doesn't really matter, but, well, I guess we have to get into that then, don't we? And in robot mode, Jesus Christ, I hate this thing.
Now again, I feel as though you're being way too harsh. In terms of looks, his chunkier aesthetic manages to contrast greatly against the limber members of the line. Typically, I don't care too much about the aesthetic of a figure, mostly because my priorities lie in the engineering. However, with regards to the appearance, they did a great job here. I'm especially fond of the head sculpt. It's painted exceptionally well, not to mention it also looks like a hybrid of the Shredder and also the Fallen. It also makes me very happy that they went with a cartoon-style black head rather than the toy-accurate green head, mostly because that would sort of make it blend in with the rest of the body. The chest is also appropriately chonky, which accentuates one particular fact. The detail is to die for! Not just on the chest, but on every part of the body. The designers have expertly crafted a bunch of mechanical greebles into every single surface! This is one strength that practically every figure in the line, no, not that one, has exhibited.
Yeah, I guess he does look alright from the front. Oh boy, where to begin? Look, to get this out of the way, no, I don't take issue with the hollow calves. Many people complain about the hollowness necessitated by transformation, but having jumped back into the franchise during the Prime Wars trilogy and understanding that inflation and rising oil costs are a thing, yeah, it's fine. I've seen way worse examples, and the wheels do a great job of distracting one from this sacrifice when looking at it from the side. It also allows him to have an incredible knee bend, although I'm not sure he really needs one considering he has double-jointed knees. Unfortunately, everything from the waist up is a complete hodgepodge. From the front and in a neutral pose, it's passable, but start rotating a bit and oh dear. I appreciate that they at least made an effort to cover up the back section, but it's not seamless, and you quickly notice all the hollow sections on the inside. It's incredibly unsightly, and yes, nobody's going to display their figures from the back, but come on, this is excessive. Who is he, Fall of Cybertron Grimlock? Then you've got the articulative issues caused by said backpack, where the hinge from the ramp system blocks off the waist swivel. Sure, Optimus Prime also had this issue, but his design and transformation were much more involved, so it was understandable. This less so. Couldn't a simple hinge have worked? And finally, taking a stab at the elephant in the room, these side panels are just atrocious.
Yeah, I actually agree with you 100% on this, Doc. Even from the very beginning when I saw them in stock photos, they looked terrible. And to be absolutely clear, this was actually my opinion before the breakage that made me reevaluate the figure somewhat. And as if that weren't bad enough, they left it completely unaltered on Trailbreaker.
Now, to a certain extent, I do get this. Again, I don't give two shits about G1 accuracy, but I recognize that these were a prominent element on the G1 toy. Sure, they could re-engineer them to cover up the legs, but I'm sure fans would complain about accuracy this and nostalgia that, so it makes sense. What doesn't make sense is the way they're attached. Was there no way to engineer it into the backpack? I would have gladly taken that over the ramp system, as much as I love Micromaster compatibility. It also makes the arms look much smaller than they actually are. They're not overly thin, but due to the proportional dissonance, they seem incredibly noodly.
So wait, does that mean they're in starch contrast to the rest of the body?
Already a gag or to spell. I know I've made several jokes about people who think Gundams are better engineered than Hasbro-made Transformers, but in this instance, it really is the case.
It's also as thin and wibbly as the plastic said Gunpla. Having said that, I can't say that I've ever randomly broken a wheel off of one of the model kits I own.
Speaking of, again, he just feels cheap and lifeless. Messing with him just isn't fun, despite having really good articulation. He feels once again like a lower-end Prime Wars trilogy figure, not dissimilar to those you'd find in the early early days of Combiner Wars. And you know why? Well, sorry to do things out of order, but it's actually his size. Yes, my old enemy, the Sunbow chart strikes again!
For those unaware, there are many G1 fans who will swear by the Sunbow production scale chart, which was very loosely used in the production of the 1984 cartoon. Now then, this works surprisingly well for figures such as Astrotrain and Cliffjumper, despite the parts forming on the latter. And there are times where the designers can stretch the budget to some truly amazing places, such as Siege Impactor. But sadly, in this case, there isn't room to breathe. They've stretched the budget of a deluxe to a near Voyager size, and as such, a lot of sacrifices had to be made.
Unfortunately, I again get where Hasbro is coming from. People complained heavily about the Thrilling 30 versions, despite the fact that they aren't nearly as undersized as some figures that we get these days. I get that they couldn't go back to making him smaller, and from a business standpoint, I guess it's fine. But from a toy design standpoint, he fails immensely. I don't believe they could have sold a Voyager hoist, especially with the line being clogged up by triple changes and re-released yet somehow worse Megatrons. But there were compromises that needed to be made. On top of that, the engineering just feels lazy. There were so many nuances they could have gone for, but simply missed. Combine laziness with compromising for fan design, and you've got yourself a figure that I consider to be Earthrise's worst deluxe.
If you look on the bright side, at least the shoulder kibble doesn't turn into a surfboard.
Out of some of what those designers were smoking, it seems pretty effective.
The articulation remains just as good as any of the Earthrise and or Siege figures, but with a few exceptions. The head doesn't get much wiggle from side to side, but it's expressive enough. The shoulders are on universal joints that, unfortunately, take the entirety of the wing kibble back with them. Seriously though, why weren't those attached to the backpack? Having said that, the bicep swivel works perfectly fine. Not to mention that we have an elbow bend so deep that it might as well be double jointed. And in addition to that, the forearms also have the Siege battle damage, weirdly enough. Though in this case, it looks far less like battle damage and more like graphite that someone tried to erase with a dry eraser. Also, the wrist can swivel just fine, though it is a bit on the tight side.
Unfortunately, as stated earlier, the waist swivel doesn't quite get what you'd hope for, but I suppose in the grand scheme of things it's not as bad as the other issues with this figure. The universal hips and thigh swivels work pretty much perfectly though, and due to transformation he has double jointed knees, although it seems kinda pointless considering his legs are hollow enough to facilitate an incredible bend anyway. Finally, the ankles tilt, and I suppose they're appropriately chonky to help support the figure without the aid of a stand. There's a lot of potential for great poses here, but the clunkiness of certain aspects just brings it down. Still, at least the gun looks far less phallic when plugged into his hand. I do like the way it covers up the hand entirely, even if it's a bit short, but at this point it's too little too late.
Yeah, at this point I'm starting to become a bit disappointed in the design as well. When the kibble is so bad that you can basically transform it into a phone stand, you know some poor decisions were made. I guess the supposed Earthrise laziness might not be so far-fetched after all. Hoist appears to be a shining example, but instead of deserving an Oscar like the cartoon would suggest, I think it would be far more fitting if he were awarded a Razzie.
Now, when I initially reviewed this figure on my own channel and my own show, It Figures, I was really positive and gave him a glowing review. But now, several months later, A, my opinions of this figure have changed, and B, Doc and a lot of other reviewers have helped me put my finger on a lot of flaws that didn't exactly verbalize in their review, we'll say.
Unfortunately, I'm finding myself a lot more cynical about this figure. It is so close to being a 1 out of 5, but there's that slight element of Hashtag charm that permeates many of their figures. It's definitely not the best, and they could have put a lot more effort into it, but we all know why they didn't.
Now, to an extent, I am still considering getting the Trailbreaker mold, because I don't know, maybe it will fix my problems I've had with this figure, but I am starting to have my doubts about it. I'm certain he'll sell well enough considering his general accuracy, kibble wings notwithstanding, but at the same time, he might not be for me.
Personally, I am 100% skipping Trailbreaker. After reviewing this figure, my opinion has plummeted even further than it had originally, and it's gotten to the point where this will probably end up at a pretty low spot on my worst of 2020 list. I really hope there aren't as many missteps of this nature in the future, especially in Kingdom, but as far as Earthrise is concerned, seeing some of the figures that are coming out in the future, yeah, I'm not getting my hopes up. But as bad as this figure is, I have no qualms against the store that provided it to me. This video was brought to you by Robotoys. Whilst I would not recommend purchasing this figure, there are several Earthrise figures, several Siege figures, several Generation Selects, third-party knockoffs, all that jazz that you can purchase from them. And don't forget to use the code DrLock 10% off the checkout if you haven't already. For a one-time use, you can get 10% off any order.
And hey, while we're doing shameless product placement, I've got a Teespring store! Teesprings is an online store that allows people like me to create and sell t-shirt designs to all of you. If you want to save $10 off your first purchase on my store, I can save you $10 with the code ONLOCKDOWN. However, you better act fast, you cheeky people, because the code only lasts until the 11th of August, 2022.
What's happening? What's happening?
Dude, I tried to warn you! The space-time continuum can't handle 2 sponsorships in one video!
God, this is all your fault!
Wait, you're telling me this is your first time? What a bunch of wimps!
I'm too young to die!